To yet another session for the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the examination point of view. Let's take up today's articles for discussion. The articles which appear in today's newspaper of the Hindu of the New Delhi edition, the articles are on our screen. Let's take up the first article for discussion. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads as "Golden Era for Santhal Tribe in India Now, say community leaders." Now this news has appeared as many of us might be seeing that the NDA or the National Democratic Alliance, of which the ruling party is also a part of, is fielding the candidate for president who belongs to the Santhal community. She has not become the president yet, but given the strength of the ruling party in the legislature, it is said that she is set to become the president of India, and that is why her belonging from the Santhal community has given a lot of cheer to the community, and the community leaders are quite optimistic about the tribe's position now. So in this aspect, the information about the Santhal community and their background becomes important for us to know from the UPSC examination point of view. So that is, and how is the community important? UPSC has already asked a question on Santhal community in 2018, where the famous Santhal rebellion, which we study in modern history, was asked in the question. So this shows the importance of Santhal tribe, which holds a place in history as well, and also now will hold a part of India's future as well. So let's look at information about Santhal tribe. So apart from Draupadi Murmu, who is being the first, who's supposed to be the first tribal president of India, there are even other dignitaries who have come to the fore of Indian politics, and the other people are Hemant Soren, who we know is a Santhal and is the CM of Jharkhand right now. So even he represents the community, and Girish Chandra Murmu was the first lieutenant governor of the UT of Jammu and Kashmir. When the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir was made after abrogating Article 370, Girish Chandra Murmu was the first lieutenant governor. So even he is a Santhal representing the community, and currently he is the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Then Mayurbhanj district, which is in Odisha, the MP of that district, Bishweshwar Tudu, is the Union Minister of State for Tribal Affairs and Jal Shakti. So the representation of the Santhal community, as we can see, is quite widespread, and the people from the community are increasingly coming into the fore of national politics. That is why the Santhal community has come into the spotlight, and the community leaders are quite hopeful about the improvement of the conditions of Santhal right now. Why is this important? Because Santhal community is the third largest community after the Gond and the Bhils. So the Santhal community forms the third largest scheduled tribe community after the Gonds and Bhils. So that is why they hold a lot of importance. And what is their distribution? Where are they located? So earlier Santhals used to be, from the earlier times, they used to be nomads, but then they settled down into the Chota Nagpur plateau, and now their majority population is distributed around Odisha, Jharkhand and West Bengal, and the presidential candidate is belonging from the Mayurbhanj district of Odisha. So, and what is the language that the Santhals speak? The language which they speak is known as Santhali, which is a part of the Austro-Asiatic language group, which is a very old language which has its own script called the Old Chiki, which is included in the 8th schedule as well, right? We know the 8th schedule is a part of Indian constitution which gives the status of official languages status in the 8th schedule, and in that list the language Santhali is attached in that list. So these are the vital points which are required for us from the to know from the examination point of view from Santhal community. Now, what occupation does this community get involved in? The primary occupation of Santhal revolves around the forest. So that is why collecting the produce from forest and doing subsistence agriculture is the main occupation for Santhal community, right? Then about the Santhal uprising, which we also saw the question on. Since it's an important historical event, let's understand something about the Santhal rebellion as well, as to why was this rebellion done. This rebellion was before the 1857 revolt, wherein due to the similar causes of British oppression with respect to the land revenue, even the Santhal tribe rebelled against the British. So the Santhals of Rajmahal Hills resented the oppression by revenue officials, police, moneylenders and landlords in general, by the outsiders. So they termed all these people outsiders, who in the Santhali language is called Diku. So they rebelled against all of these establishments, and the Santhals under Sidhu and Kanu rose up against their oppressors, declared the end of the company's rule and asserted themselves independent in 1854. It was only in 1856, after the extensive military operations, that the situation was brought under control. Sidhu died in 1855 while Kanu was arrested in 1866. So the rebellion, though crushed by the British, but caused a lot of damage to the British intentions. A separate district of Santhal Parganas was created by the government to pacify the Santhals. So that is why, with the impact created, the British government had to give some respite, which was done by creating the Santhal Parganas. Right? So this was the information regarding Santhal rebellion, which also forms an important historic event in our modern Indian history. With this, let's move on to the next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper talks about 4 new corals recorded from Indian waters. Now this becomes a very important article because the concept of corals is quite central for UPSC, and a lot of questions have already been asked, and this becomes important for us to study from the GS3 point of view, wherein we study the environment and also in prelims. Right? So now repeated questions are asked on corals. Why? Because corals hold that much importance, and since given the importance of corals, now this news of 4 new coral species being recorded in India for the first time, we'll look into what these new species are, and we'll have a general discussion on the corals and their importance and what issues are being plagued, which is why the UPSC is also focusing upon them. So first of all, what are corals? Corals are these kind of structures that we see often in the underwater oceans if we visited, or in pictures. So what are these corals? The corals are these things which look like plants. They are actually not plants, but they are invertebrate animals. So they are invertebrate animals belonging to a large group of colorful and fascinating animals called Cnidaria. So first thing that we need to look at is that they are not plants, but they are invertebrate animals. Then each coral animal is called a polyp. So this coral, each structure is known as a polyp, which is known as a coral polyp, and most live in groups of hundreds to thousands of genetically identical polyps that form a colony. So as we can see, these polyps are grouped together and they live with hundreds and thousands of coral polyps together, which are together called as a colony. Then the important thing now in these coral polyps is that these polyps have microscopic algae called zooxanthellae. Now we have to see this unique relationship that there exist these invertebrate animals, and within these animals exist a microscopic algae known as zooxanthellae. Now whenever two kinds of species are living together, they have a symbiotic relationship, which means that one species is giving something to another, and in return the other species is giving something to the other species. So in this case, the algae which is living within the tissues of the coral polyps have a mutual relationship. How? The coral provides the algae with the compounds necessary for photosynthesis. So this is an algae which will perform photosynthesis, and the compounds necessary for the algae to perform photosynthesis is supplied by these coral polyps. and in return what will the the zooxanthellae algae will do? It will supply the coral with the organic products of photosynthesis or the byproducts of photosynthesis or the food for coral polyps. So this is the mutual relationship or symbiotic relationship that exists, which is a very unique relationship which exists between the coral polyps and the zooxanthellae algae, right? So then in addition to providing the corals with essential nutrients apart from the byproducts, these algae are the products which are responsible for the unique and beautiful colors of the corals. So what we see in these corals of different colors, these colors are given by the zooxanthellae algae, which reside in the tissue of these invertebrate coral polyps. So I hope this symbiotic relationship is being clear. Now these corals, based on their structures, when they receive the nutrients from the zooxanthellae algae such as all carbohydrates, they develop a calcium carbonate structure, which we often see in corals, which is the hard structure. So based on this, there are two types of corals. One is a hard coral and other is a soft coral. Those corals which will develop this calcium carbonate structure will be the hard corals, because they will have a hard structure, and those who will not and will have soft feathery texture and appearance will be soft corals. There are around 800 known species of hard coral and are also known as the reef building corals. Now what do we mean by reef building corals? When these hard calcium carbonate structured corals come together, as we saw that they exist in colonies, when they come together in millions of numbers, they create a structure known as coral reef around the island or around the coast of the land. And these coral reefs are of extreme importance. How? Because they control the tides of water that comes from the sea to the land. They also become a major spot for fishing and tourism. So they hold a lot of importance. The major coral reef that we always talk about is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, right? It is the largest coral reef which is being subjected to a phenomenon called as coral bleaching, which means that the corals over there, the reef over there is depleting, the corals are dying. What is coral bleaching? We'll look into it in a bit, but it is to mention that they are facing this. So who will build this coral reef? The hard corals will build this. That is why the hard corals are known as the reef building corals. Alright, I hope this is clear. We classified corals into two, hard coral and soft coral, and the hard coral are also called as reef building corals when they build because they have the calcium carbonate structure. And soft corals, which include sea fans, sea feathers and sea whips, don't have the rock-like calcareous skeleton like the others. Instead, they grow wood-like cores for support and fleshy rings for protection. So this is a figure for hard corals, right? We can see that this is the calcium carbonate structure, and millions of these corals, when they come together, they create a coral reef. And coming to India, where are coral reefs found in India? So corals are generally found in India in 4 major areas, such as the Gulf of Mannar, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Lakshadweep Islands and the Gulf of Kutch. These are 4 main areas where the coral reefs are found or corals are found in general. Since these corals now, since the algae would require sunlight for photosynthesis, it is generally seen that these corals are generally in the shallow waters. They are also present in deep waters where the need for photosynthesis is not that much. Then the growth of these corals is also very slow, but generally these corals are therefore found in shallow waters due to the presence of these algae which would require sunlight to flourish and perform photosynthesis. Now coming to today's article, where these 4 new species have been found out. So let's study about them first. What about these 4 species of coral recorded for the first time in India, and from where have they been recorded? In one of the 4 areas where we find coral reefs, that is Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now what is special about these 4 new species? First of all, they were never found in India. They were earlier found in areas such as Japan and Australia, but in India it is their first recording. And what kind of corals are there? Up until now we were looking at corals who have zooxanthellae algae as their symbiotic relationship counterpart, but these corals have azooxanthellate corals. They are known as azooxanthellate corals, which means that whenever we add a in front of a word, it means that these are corals who are not zooxanthellae algae. So they would not have the zooxanthellae algae, instead they would have other kind of algae, which are the different other types other than the zooxanthellae algae, and therefore they derive nourishment not from the sun, which was earlier the case of the zooxanthellae algae, but from capturing different types of planktons. Planktons are in the sea, which become the food for these zooxanthellae corals, right? So this is a unique part which is being found out. Second unique part is that they are present in deep sea. Up until now we were seeing that corals are generally found in shallow sea because the zooxanthellae algae requires sunlight for photosynthesis, but they are present in deep sea. However, they are also present in shallow sea, but the major part is that they are also present in deep sea. And another part is that azooxanthellate corals are hard corals, but they are not reef building corals. So they are again being differentiated from the hard corals. Earlier we were seeing that if they are hard corals having the calcium carbonate structure, they will build the reef. But in this case, since they are deep corals, they are situated deep inside the ocean, they are non-reef building corals. So that is why the discovery of these new corals is according to the Zoological Survey of India director, it's a very unique discovery which would enhance our knowledge about studying of these unique corals who do not rely on the zooxanthellae algae, which are hard corals but still are non-reef building and they exist in the deep sea. So they are of much importance to study. So that is why they become important, and the information about these corals also become equally important. Now let's look at a concept known as coral bleaching, which is central to our discussion, because after understanding these concept of corals, they hold a lot of importance. As I said, they control the tides, they are an important site for fishing as well as for tourism, and they hold and in the marine ecosystem they hold a very important part, but they are undergoing depletion with a phenomenon known as coral bleaching. What is this coral bleaching? What is happening? So when we talk about coral bleaching, what happens in coral bleaching? As we are seeing that the ocean temperatures are increasingly warming, global warming is increasing the temperature, ocean acidification is also increasing due to the influx of a lot of chemicals and less discharge of fresh water into the ocean. So all of this phenomenon is changing the dynamics of the ocean water. Therefore what happens is that what is a healthy coral? It is when the symbiotic relationship between the algae and the polyp is going good, and in that way the coral is surviving. But it becomes a stressed coral when the relationship between the zooxanthellae algae and the polyp starts to degrade, due to which factors? Change in ocean temperature, runoff and pollution, over sunlight, extremely low tides. These reasons which I was talking about, when they start to play their role, the zooxanthellae algae start to leave the coral. And when they leave the coral, obviously the nutrients which the algae was supplying the coral, the polyp will not be able to receive that, and the coral starts to die, which is also known as bleaching of the coral. Because all the colors of that coral start to run off, because as we saw, the colors are provided by the algae, and that is when the stage of bleached coral starts to appear. Therefore, this is a very dangerous phenomenon that is increasingly occurring, and more awareness needs to be spread on this part, and there are a lot of initiatives being instituted to combat this phenomenon, and work is going on to reduce the phenomenon of coral bleaching. Right? So this was the discussion on corals, which are an important part for us to study from the UPSC examination point of view. With this, let's take up the next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper talks about PM Modi to attend G7 summit in Germany. Now the G7 or the group of 7 is a organized international grouping of the 7 most influential countries in the international world order and world economy. That is why the information about this grouping becomes important for us from the GS2 point of view, where we study the international groupings. So we look at the this grouping, but why is the G7 summit important in this backdrop? So the G7 countries, first of all, are UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the US. Hence the name group of 7, because it's a group of 7 countries, and as we see, these are the major European and the American countries. So why does this become important? Because these countries, as we are seeing, are leading the front on sanctions against Russia in the Russia-Ukraine war, and we know that they are putting a lot of pressure on India as well to comply with the sanction. But India's stand in the Russia-Ukraine war has been different, where it is trying to balance its interest in with all parties. That is why India holds a key role, and it needs to prepare for the more mounting pressure that will come to India from these countries again in this G7 summit. That is why this G7 summit and these group of countries become very important, and therefore PM Modi will attend the G7 summit later in June, now on 26th to 28th June, and they will talk about a lot of issues with respect to energy, health, gender, and also the this pressing issue of sanctions on Russia. So in this backdrop, let's look at some information about the group of 7 or G7 countries, which is a intergovernmental organization that was formed in 1975. The bloc meets annually to discuss issues of common interest like global economic governance, international security and energy policy. The G7 countries are, which we have already seen, and all these countries and India are part of a larger grouping known as G20. G20 are those countries where apart from G7, other countries are also included. And the G7 does not have a formal constitution or a fixed headquarters. Their decisions are taken by leaders during annual summits and are non-binding. So this summit is going to be one such annual summit of the G7. So as and when this summit gets covered, we'll look at what developments happened in the G7 summit and we'll be waiting for the news. With this, we finish today's important articles. We'll meet again tomorrow with the important articles from tomorrow's newspaper. Thank you.